Aaron Dunn's work, the beginning of his work, lay at some distance from the springs, and he left every morning with a lot of workmen by an early train, almost before daylight. And every morning, although the mornings were cold and wintry, Hetta got him his breakfast with her own hands. She took his dollars so that he was not completely left in the power of Kate O'Brien. In the evening, leaving his work when it was dark, Aaron returned, and then the evening was spent together. The women would make the tea, cut the bread and butter, and then sew, while Aaron Dunn, when the cups were taken away, would go to his plans and drawings. On Sundays they were more together, but even on this day there was cause for separation, since they went to different churches. But in the afternoon they were all at home, and then Phineas Beckard came in to tea, and he and Aaron talked about religion. They disagreed a good deal, but the minister told the women that Aaron had good ideas in him. Things went on in this way for more than a month. Aaron had told himself again and again that that face was sweet to look at, and had promised himself certain pleasures in talking and perhaps walking with the owner of it. But he had not yet succeeded in the walkings or even the talkings. The truth was that Dunn was rather afraid of women. And then he felt angry with himself because he had done nothing, and as he lay in his bed, he decided that he would be a little braver. He had no idea of making love to Susan Bell, of course not. But why should he not amuse himself by talking to a pretty girl when she sat so near him, evening after evening? "What a very quiet young man he is," said Susan to her sister. "He has his bread to earn, and so he works hard," said Hetta. "Probably he has his amusement when he is in the city." They all had their settled places in the sitting-room. Hetta sat on one side of the fire, close to the table. There she was always busy. She must have made every dress worn in the house. Sometimes, once a week perhaps, Phineas Beckard came in, and then a place was made for him between Hetta's usual seat and the table. On the other side, close also to the table, sat the mother, busy, but not as busy as her daughter. Between Mrs. Bell and the wall, Susan would sit, doing a little work and talking sometimes to her mother. Opposite them all, at the other side of the table, far away from the fire, Aaron Dunn sat, with his plans and drawings in front of him. "Do you know a good bridge when you see it, madam?" said Aaron the evening after he had made his decision. This was how he began his love-making. "Bridge?" cried Mrs. Bell. "Oh, no, sir." But she put out her hand to take the little drawing which Aaron handed to her. "Because that's one I've planned for one part of the railway line. I think Miss Susan knows something about bridges." "I don't think so," said Susan. "Only that they shouldn't fall down when the cold weather comes." "Ha, ha, ha! Quite right." "Oh, how pretty," said the woman, and then Susan, of course, jumped up to look over her mother's shoulder. The clever man! He had drawn and coloured a beautiful little picture of a bridge. "Well, that is a pretty bridge," said Susan. "Isn't it, Hetta?" "I don't know anything about bridges," said Hetta. The trick was quite clear to her clever eyes, but Mrs. Bell and Susan had soon moved their chairs round the table and were looking at Aaron's drawings. "But He may be a bad man, thought the poor mother as she was kneeling down to say her prayers that night. That evening, Aaron had certainly made a start. Before bedtime, he was teaching Susan how to use his drawing instruments. Susan liked it and had an enjoyable time that evening. It is dull to go on week after week and month after month talking only to one's mother and one's sister. Susan did not think of Aaron as a possible lover at all, but young ladies do like the conversations of young gentlemen. Susan was happy when she went to bed, but Hetta was frightened at the trick. "Oh, Hetta, you ought to have looked at those drawings. He is so clever," said Susan. "I don't think they would have done me much good," replied Hetta. "Good? They do me more good than going to church, except on Sunday, of course." This was a bad-tempered attack on Hetta and Hetta's admirer, Phineas. "I'm sure he's bad," thought Hetta as she went to bed. "What a very clever young man he is," thought Susan to herself as she pulled the warm bedclothes round her shoulders and ears. "Well, that was certainly better," thought Aaron, as he did the same. In the next 2 weeks, Aaron sometimes read poetry to the others in the evenings. "He reads much better than Mr. Beckard," Susan said one night. "Of course, you're a good judge," had been Hetta's reply. "I mean that I like it better," said Susan. And then there was a great deal of talking. The mother herself talked freely and enjoyed it, and Beckard came there more often and talked a lot. There grew up a sort of friendship between the young men. It was at the end of the 2nd month when Aaron took another step. A dangerous step. In the evenings he still went on with his drawing for an hour or two, but for 3 or 4 evenings he did not ask anyone to look at what he was doing. One Friday he sat over his work until late, without any reading or talking at all. So late that at last Mrs. Bell said, "If you're going to sit much longer, Mr. Dunn—" "I've finished now," said Aaron, and he looked carefully at the paper on which he had put his colours. "I've finished now." He paused for a moment, but then he carried the paper up to his bedroom with the rest. It was clear that it was intended as a present for Susan Bell. The question which Aaron asked himself that night was this: should he offer the drawing to Susan in the presence of her mother and sister, or on some other occasion when they might be alone together? They had never been alone together yet, but Aaron thought they might be. But he did not want to make it seem important. His first intention had been to throw the drawing carelessly across the table when it was completed, and to treat it as nothing. But he had finished it with more care than he had at first intended, and then he had paused when he had finished it. It was too late now to be careless about it. On the Saturday evening, when he came down from his room, Mr. Beckard was there, and there was no opportunity that night. On the Sunday, he went to church and walked with the family. This pleased Mrs. Bell, but Sunday was not a suitable day for the picture. On Monday, the matter had become important to him. Things always do when they are delayed. Before tea that evening, when he came down, only Mrs. Bell and Susan were in the room. He knew Hetta was his enemy, and therefore he decided to take this opportunity. Miss Susan, he said slowly, his face a fiery red, I have done a little drawing which I want you to accept. Oh, I'm not sure, said Susan, who had seen the red face.